Okay, welcome everybody. We'll call this meeting to order. This is the Town of Andover Board of Finance meeting for Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. We will go ahead and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the
republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
God,
indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Second item is public speak. I do not see any members of the public. Eric, can you confirm? Is that what you all see? Nobody?
That's correct.
Okay.
The only non-board member is Community Voice Channel.
Community Voice, yeah. Okay, good. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which is changes or additions to the agenda. Does anybody have any recommended changes or additions?
I do.
Liz? Yeah.
My name is spelled incorrectly in 2 spots. There's no H at the end. So in the first members present and then the adjournment, it's L-O-K-I-E-C. L-O-K-I-E-C. I before E. So I figure if we get that taken care of now, we won't have to revisit it again.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Correct.
So in the meeting minutes, okay, yeah.
We'll make that correction. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can do that when we go to that agenda item. I think we can vote on it based on that change.
Okay, and one more thing.
Yep.
I had a question about number 6 when we were talking about the hiring of the assistant community center person. This says the assistance hours will qualify for the MERS pension plan. I re-listened to that section of the meeting a couple of times, and I don't think that's exactly what you said, Eric. Is that what you said? Did you say that we are responsible for the director's MERS plan?
Correct.
Are we talking about in the meeting minutes, Liz?
In the meeting minutes, right? That's what we're talking about, right?
Let's take that up when we get to that section.
When we get to the meeting minutes, yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought that's what we're talking about. My bad.
No, we're on number 3, which is changes or additions to tonight's agenda.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So just as a matter of information, and I think most of you know this, but generally the way that this works is that the agenda has to get published in advance of the meeting. And during regular meetings, we can, regularly scheduled meetings, we can make changes or additions to the agenda by voting on them as a board. Somebody can make a motion and say, I'd like to add agenda item 6, new business, item H, put in new playground equipment or whatever, whatever it happens to be. So we can make those changes then during our new business or during our regular meetings. For special meetings, which we may call from time to time that are not regularly scheduled, we generally cannot make changes to the agenda. We can only discuss what's been published in the agenda, which I think has to happen 24, 48 hours in advance.
24.
Yeah. So that's just a general information. I know Liz, you're new, and Kimberly's fairly new. I don't know if that's ever come up before. So we'll generally have an item on our agenda to address any additions or changes to the agenda that anybody might request. So
right,
just
I jumped ahead.
Yeah, we would have a motion and we would have a vote on it. So we don't necessarily have to do it if there's only one member that's at all interested in the topic, I suppose. We don't have to approve it, but generally we would, just for the sake of discussion.
Okay, sorry about that.
Nope, that's quite all right. This is all about learning how this works. So that being said, does anybody have any proposed changes or additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, now we'll move on to the approval of the meeting minutes. So Liz has pointed out a couple of things. One is her name is spelled wrong, which we do need to get right. And it's
L-O-K-I-E-C.
Yeah. It's in your email correctly, right? So
yes, it is.
Yeah, initially I think I saw, might have seen something different. And then you're saying that item 6,
C.
Yeah, I think that's misstated. I think I'll let Eric speak to that.
Sure. Item 6B, the
Number 2.
assistant's hours is, what I said is she will always be kept under the 19 hours a week, which would obligate the town to pay for her entry into MERS. So what's written there is not correct. You could simply say will not qualify for MERS.
No, but in your statement, you had said the director, although she's not taking the medical benefits, she will qualify for the MERS plan.
Correct.
Okay.
what item is it? I'm sorry.
6B.
It's 6B.
Oh, B
6B.
is in boy. Okay. Bravo. Okay.
6B. Yeah.
Hiring
And
using, okay, hiring assistant.
I think the confusion was the assistant versus the director.
Yes.
Okay. So do we think this needs to get corrected or no?
Yep.
Okay,
I would think so.
it does. Okay.
Eric,
So
oh, sorry.
the-
Mark, you go.
So what, assistants should be replaced with directors?
I think the line that it should be changed to is that the assistant will
Not.
not qualify for
Right.
MERS.
Right.
If we want to put something in there about the director, that's kind of a new sentence, but the
Okay,
sentence
okay.
exists is
Yeah.
talking about the assistant, and as we just discussed.
Just change the word to not, or add the word not.
Right.
Okay.
And I was just gonna add or ask Mark, Eric, can you remind us, what is the number of hours they have to work? I think is it 20 hours for MERS?
So yes, anybody that works 20 or more hours
Mhm.
has to contribute, and the town has to contribute into a retirement account for them.
Mhm. And so you were stating that this person would always work below 20. I know
Correct.
in our last meeting, we had said we'd talk over the phone too, because I had a couple questions about this, so we had
Sure.
had that telephone call. Yeah, thank you. Just a
Okay.
clarification.
Anybody see any other concerns with the agenda or the minutes? Sorry.
Mhm.
Okay, so we
Good.
do a couple of things. We can just table this until the next meeting and have it corrected and added to our next agenda, or we can vote to approve it with the changes that were identified by Liz.
I make the motion that we approve it with the changes that's identified by Liz,
Okay, so that would correct her name
her
spelling.
name, and add the word not to the assistant.
So assistant
Director.
hours will not qualify for MERS pension plan, should be how it reads in
Right.
items 6B2.
I
I'll
second
second that.
that.
Okay, Louise seconds. Do we have any
Sorry
further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none. Very good. We'll move on. So the next item is 5A, old business review budget to actual. I personally haven't taken the time to look through this. Does anybody have any questions? Or Eric, is there anything we should be looking at that's of concern?
No, at this point, there's nothing really of concern. The budget is in reasonably good shape considering where we are in the fiscal year.
Okay, any questions from the board members? Okay, hearing none, I guess we'll go ahead and move on. Well, 5B is the check register. Anybody have any questions on the check register?
I had one question, Mark.
Yep, Joanne?
It might have come up at a prior meeting, but I did see one check. Maybe Eric could tell us what it was for Abby's contracting in the amount
Sure.
of 19,656.26 in October. Yeah.
Sure. So we made a decision to do a bunch of late season shimming of our roadways. Abby is a contractor that we have essentially just a day price for. So we buy the asphalt and they apply it. So whenever you see a bill for Abby's, you'll almost always see another bill for AEN asphalt or occasionally Haynes asphalt. So we elected to do Cone Road, Juravati Road, and Skinner Hill Road before the plow season because they were all in really rough shape and we didn't get to it in the round of our chip sealing. Because those are on our priority chip seal list for next year. We basically just jumped the gun to fill in the really bad wheel ruts now. So we make it safe for plow season and then we'll fine tune it in spring before we chip seal those roads.
Is that the same contractor that does the chip sealing as well?
No,
Okay.
no, for chip sealing, we tend to use the last time around we used Comer Contracting, but we've used a couple different vendors over the last 2 to 3 years.
And
But
what was
probably
the,
we're gonna stick with Comer, but it's gonna depend somewhat on pricing.
just because I had mentioned in prior meetings, the Wheeling Road compared to the Bear Swamp, I think it looks so much better, when we had said, is that the second contractor, right, Comer?
So there are pluses and minuses to it. And I personally agree with you that I like the job done on Wheeling better. But if you look carefully on that road, when they chip sealed, they had a much bigger overlap between the course when they chip sealed in one direction for the other direction. So that will make it harder to plow that road smoothly and get all the snow off the road. So there are some things Gorman did better, and there are some things Comer did better. However, the public was so pissed off about Gorman and the amount of dust, I don't think the town is likely to consider Gorman too much. However, Gorman was just bought out by Allstate, so it's anybody's guess what that company is going to be going forward anyway.
I think it's more of a health hazard, Eric. That dust, I mean, I breathed it for weeks on end. And it did damage to my car too, to tell you the truth, but that's a whole nother story. I'm glad we're switched to this new, smaller black chip.
Just looks so good. It's what I remember this process looking like in other towns too. And, the variety of roads that, I won't go on and on, but I just wanted to remember the name of it. So it's Comer.
And I agree with you. I like this chip seal much better. But
visual.
not everybody does.
Right.
The roads Gorman did ultimately do come out smoother than what Comer does, but there's a lot more hassle getting it. So
Okay.
good and bad.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just wanted to know the name of that. Thanks.
Yep.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Go for it.
What is the CRM company for? I looked it up. They're like a rubber crumb kind of company that does playgrounds or something.
I'll be honest with you. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can certainly get back to you.
Okay. And because I don't know anything, I'm going to
Sure.
ask something that maybe everybody else knows. Why the payments to neighboring towns like South Windsor?
Mansfield.
What's
Mansfield was
that?
one. Mansfield was another one I saw.
Mansfield.
Sure, I
Yeah.
can answer that because Andover's a really little town and we sub out a lot of our operations to other municipalities. The payment to Mansfield is the payment for Eastern Highlands Health District. They're a 13-town health district that covers the town of Andover. That's our expense for the health district. South Windsor
Gotcha.
provides IT services to the town of Andover. Bolton provides our building official. We sub out athletic field maintenance to Hebron. We sub out animal control to Northeast Council of Governments. And those are all the ones off the top of my head. But yeah, that's what those payments are. Those are payments for services rendered to the town.
Thank you.
Actually, now that I think about it, pretty sure CRM is the company that picks up our tires. I was trying to think about it. The reason the amount doesn't make sense to me is I know how many tires we collected, but we also, there was somebody dumped a lot of waste tires at the Andover Sportsman's Club. So we used the town contract the last time we had tires hauled, and we hauled theirs also. And then just charged the Sportsman's Club because they have no real way to get rid of 100 some odd tires dumped on their property, but the town does. So of that CRM bill, the town's portion was about 800. We back charged the Sportsman's Club, I think $407 for the tires that were dumped on their property.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to look that one up.
Okay, other questions on the check register?
I am gonna throw one more in, Mark, just so that, because I know we have a lot of new members and we've been bringing up different things that, well, not a lot of new members, but just might not have heard this question. The MRF payment, Eric, that I know was 13,992. Remind me, is that quarterly? That's not monthly, is it?
No, it's
I should look
not
that up.
monthly,
Mhm.
but I don't remember whether it's bi-monthly or,
Okay.
quarterly, to be honest.
I can look back in our packets too to see how often.
Yeah, I know I don't do that one. That one doesn't come through every single month. We
Okay,
don't pay that every month.
that's good.
What
Thank
does
you.
that, what does that stand for, MRF?
Municipal Employee Retirement Fund.
Fund, yep.
It is the state-run retirement fund that the town has participated in since the '70s.
So what is the difference between that and the MERS, MERS, as in Sam?
Nothing really.
That was
Same
a
name.
typo, yeah, was it a typo? Yeah.
Is it a
Well,
typo?
it's actually referred to as both.
Okay.
Okay.
There's no difference between those two acronyms.
Okay.
I don't remember the MERS, okay. Okay,
Sorry,
any
lastly,
other
just-
questions? Yep,
Yeah.
go ahead, John.
Just to follow up, Eric, and just to, since Liz had an interest too, isn't it, it's above 15% now, right? That's contributed per employee. Do you remember what
Uh,
or was it up to 18% at one point? I know we fluctuate every year.
it got as high as like just over 18%.
That's what I thought, yeah.
It's backed off from that because the state of Connecticut renegotiated that whole package and the way cost of living was calculated
Mhm.
with the employee unions. So it's at around 15% right now. The problem is that, when it comes to budgeting, we don't know that exact number when we first set our budget. So
Mhm.
sometimes they'll give us guidance, but that's not a firm number until they've crunched all their actuarial numbers essentially for the previous year, and then tell the towns what the individual contributions are in the town's contribution. And it varies from year to year when they do that. We're hoping to have that in January, that number.
Thanks, yeah.
Right, so can I just piggyback on that? So the 15%, is that 15% of the person's salary we pay? Okay,
Correct.
or whatever the percentage is. Thank
It's
you.
always gonna be a big number. It's a nice benefit for the employees.
Yeah,
I have a question on the safety marketing
Right.
item.
Go ahead, Louise.
What exactly is that?
Which one are you talking about?
11,779, 778, the $13,964.
Oh, that is the company that does the line striping on town roads.
Okay,
And I think we had them do parking lots and a few other things. But that's predominantly line striping on roads, which is why we don't do a whole lot of that. Because epoxy striping a road and meeting the new state standards for reflectivity, it's really expensive per mile now. So, yeah.
Was that part of the community centers thing as well, when you redid did the parking lot?
So the front part of the lot where the community center is, that was all part of the original bid with the contractor. They were on the hook for doing the striping relative to that. When we redid the parking lot between the town and the garage, some of that striping is incorporated in that number for safety systems.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I guess we can go on to our next agenda item, which is 6C. I'm sorry, 6B. Sorry, 6A. We were just moving. You're not the only one that wants to move this
Moving
along
way ahead.
this. AES Capital Fund. So I'm not sure what the topic is here, Eric. Just to discuss fund. It
I
came
mean,
up questions from the Board of Ed, but
I was gonna say, can I put, if Eric we can listen to Eric first, and then I had a couple of things to add, because I know I had mentioned in the last meeting that there was a few emails back and forth just to get it all straight and make sure it was created. Is that what you think it is too, Eric?
I'm not sure exactly why you wanted to address. I remember after the last meeting in my notes, there was something to add a discussion of that for this meeting. Currently, there's around $212,000 in that fund. So one of the things that seems to be confusing the Board of Ed is that in the past, when we established a fund, we also established a standalone bank account for that fund. We have stopped doing that, and we have started using pooled cash. The difference being, if there's a standalone bank account, the interest accrues to that particular fund. And if you're using pooled cash, the interest essentially accrues to the town. And if you notice, like in our budget this year, we account for roughly $140,000 in interest income in our income line coming into the town, because we're assuming that goes to the town directly, not to the individual funds. The Board of Ed seems to think that that money should accrue directly to the funds, but that's a decision ultimately that the Board of Finance, I think, would make. And then that would be put in, next year's budget. If you want that money to accrue to all the capital funds, then we would do that, but we would reduce the income line item in our budget from its current 140,000, and that would decrease that line item by somewhere around $60,000 or $70,000. Because we would no longer be crediting the income to the town, we would be crediting it to specific funds.
I wanted to further say, well, not touching on that quite yet. I know that that would probably present some questions, like you said. I was happy to see what Cheryl provided us. I was in the email with Mark. I believe you were on it too, where I know there's been a lot of questions that they wanted just to see an accounting that the money we talked about, the total you just said, the 212, 431, I believe it is, that they can see the balance sheet or whatever that Cheryl provided. There was a lot of talk to make sure that the couple things, the one we had created and then funded with 100,000, plus whatever they had returned for the parking lot or the basketball court, whatever was happening, didn't get done, just to see it in one spot. So I'm hoping that Cheryl answered, the Board of Ed questions as to having that all in one place. The other thing she did mention, and I don't know what the Board of Ed will decide on this, it's hard to, Cheryl has it correctly named, you know, so that it can see AES Capital Fund. But Cheryl did say that maybe a bank statement didn't, a question came from a Board of Ed member that I happened to be copied on, that it wasn't spelled out exactly with that name. And Cheryl provided feedback that it's hard to change a bank account name once it's established. But the backup and everything that goes with it and the funding all matches up to what the town records have. Again, that's deeper than I go, but I thought by reading Cheryl's email, she gave a lot of good feedback to them. So I hope that they're happy with that. That's my 2 cents to add to it.
Yeah, I think Joanne kind of summed it up. There was some confusion because the bank account was named, you know, AES Capital
Expansion,
Fund, and they were wondering
yes.
about the other one, and
Yeah.
yeah, so Cheryl cleared up that the name was difficult to, you know, change, but that the account line items would accrue appropriately. And they have asked also about a STIF fund, a separate STIF fund, and I think that their main concern would be that any interest income coming from the AES funds would roll back into those funds, which sounds like what you're saying, Eric, that the Board of Selectmen thinks should happen with all the funds.
No, I'm not. I'm saying Cheryl and I were discussing that. If the way it works now is if there is a standalone bank account, a checking account assigned to a particular fund, whatever money is in that checking account, the interest in that account automatically accrues to that account. But for most funds and for most things, the money is essentially held in pooled cash. So the money is still sitting in one big pot, most of which is in the STIF account. But essentially there's a credit, for lack of a better term, to particular. So that money, although it's sitting in the bank, it is spoken for by that fund. So it's not like you could spend it from something else without deliberately making a motion to take something out of a fund. But there's not an individual bank account for that, frankly, because it was getting out of control. I mean, we still have 26 bank accounts with 26 checking accounts with M&T, and every single one of those we're paying fees on, and we're having to reconcile every month. So as we move forward, we're eliminating those for most things and going to pooled cash. Now, there are some things where we probably can't do that. And an example of that would be the Norton funds, because of the charter under which that money was given to the town when Chester Norton kicked off in the 1940s. We're still, you know, operating under that. So, but for most things, that's how we've been doing it. If the board thinks it's appropriate to have that money, the interest automatically roll into the fund, that's okay. That's certainly your decision as a board. But in some ways, it's a zero-sum game because that's revenue the town's not getting. So, you know, we would just reduce the amount that we would fund that fund at to account for the interest going into it if you wanted to go that route. It's really kind of what you guys as a board, or you all as a board, want to do.
Well, the Norton Fund, Eric, they can only spend the interest, right? They can never spend the principal.
Correct.
Yeah, that's probably why it was left that way. And then all of the STIF accounts, they are set up so that all the interest is accrued to the individual accounts, right? The individual.
There's one STIF account.
I realize there's one STIF account, but I thought it had a way of doing accounting that said, I'm making stuff up, you know, road fund account. I'm just making stuff up. Interest earned, and it would stay within that specific. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of different funds within the STIF, and the interest would be allocated correctly to each one of the different line items, I guess.
We certainly could do that if
thought
that
that's what
is
we were
what you
doing.
want to do as a board. As in general, we haven't been doing that.
Oh,
We've only been accruing the interest if there's an actual separate bank account for that.
Okay.
I kind of see what Bill's saying too, because I feel like I've heard discussions and I wish I knew which meeting, whether it was ours or at the Board of Selectmen, that we were going to be putting the interest in the different funds. I mean,
Yeah, I
I feel
thought-
like I'm not pulling it out, and now I feel like we're reverting back to not with Eric's assessment of it. But it's good for us to bring it up and see what we want to do, or if, when that comes before us. Cause it kind of makes sense to have it. I mean, I know it's a lot of work, but even if you have it all in that one stiff account, but I thought that Cheryl had said there's the separate funds that she lists, and then she was able to pull out the interest.
That's
to
what I
those.
remember. There was
Yeah, and I feel like I do too, Bill, so
Yeah.
I'm with you on this one. I don't want to revert all the way back to what Eric is sort of describing right now and saying we hadn't discussed that yet. I thought that it had the backing of, and I will go through my emails. We don't have to prolong all of this now, but I mean, this has been a question that's kind of been going forward. He has the more direct line to Cheryl, but I feel like we've heard that before.
The only other question I had, Eric, was on the rest of those 26 various separate accounts, what is stopping us from, other than like the Norton Fund, why aren't we moving all those accounts into the stiff fund as quick as possible so that we earn a lot more interest?
Well, so that's a good question. And a lot of them we have moved in. It just with M&T, it's kind of an act of Congress to actually close an account. And the reason why we haven't been stressing over that is I think we probably are going to quit M&T completely. We're just going to do it in phases. Mainly because I want to make sure if we switch banks, and we're considering a switch to Webster Bank, that we end up in a better situation, not a worse situation. So what we're talking about doing is changing essentially 3 things over now and just waiting 6 months and see how it goes. And if it works well, when the treasurer's back in Connecticut again, we'll switch all the accounts over.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the capital fund or other discussion? Yeah, we'll probably need to revisit this, maybe in the new year. Make sure we have clarity that everybody's on the same page. So maybe it accrues during the budget season. That would be a good time to make it clear what we would expect to happen. Okay, so if nobody has anything else, we'll go to 6B, which is to review the policy on nominations for the chair and the vice chair. So if you remember, I brought this up last meeting. I had gone back and looked, and I said, oh, we had voted at some point to do an annual nomination and selection of the chair and vice chair for the board. That was in August. And there may have been a reason we kind of picked that time, or it may have just been because it came up there in that time. We haven't done it, we didn't do it this year. So one thing that I would propose is that we consider changing the timing of that election to the first meeting after the election cycle. So maybe, first, typically that would be the November meeting, right? So if we do it then, it gives the new members an opportunity to vote in that selection of the chair and the vice chair. And if for some reason the membership changes during the election cycle, then that also would take that into account. So we wouldn't have to scramble and make that change anyway. So both are strong possibilities, and we certainly want to make sure that the new members have an opportunity, I think, to vote for the chair and the vice chair. So I think that it would be in order, if you guys are in agreement with that concept, or we can certainly discuss it, but I think it would be in order for us to make a motion to change the board's policy to nominate and vote on the chair and vice chair either annually or biannually in the November timeframe, November meeting, or soon thereof if we don't meet in November, because sometimes we haven't. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
It makes sense to me. One thing I'd mention is I think a bunch of terms are up next year, so if we did biannual, we'd be kind of missing that. So, either we set it up such that we have a vote now, and then we say, okay, we'll do one more next year and then go to biannual, or we just stick with annual. Because otherwise you'd have a bunch of, like you said, people coming in who then didn't have an opportunity to vote for chair, vice chair.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Rob. And, my thinking would be probably just keep it annually. I mean, we've had enough turnover through people resigning, or, in addition to just the election cycle. So it probably makes sense to do it annually. It just keeps it clean, and we don't have to remember to do it in the same off cycle that we would otherwise.
Yeah. And I personally am in complete agreement that the meeting after the election is the appropriate time to do it. I don't know. We must have picked August because we were thinking it came up and that's the time we were dealing with it. And
It was
it's a quiet
after the
time.
fiscal year it ended.
We just gotten through the budget cycle and it's an easy time to do it. But now that you mention it, makes a lot more sense to do right after the election. Yeah.
Right back.
Anybody other thoughts? We can go ahead and make a motion. Then I'll just, normally the chair doesn't motion that much, but I would say I'll go ahead and make the motion to change the board's policy on the nomination and selection of the chair and vice chair to the November meeting or the next thereof, if that's not held, and have that selection annually.
I'll second that.
A second, at least.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. Further questions? Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, very good. We'll move on. The next one is to nominate and vote on the chair and vice chair. So here we are. I'll just say a couple things prefatory to this, that this is just more for the new members like Liz who haven't really been through this cycle before. The chair and the vice chair, the main job is to run the meetings. We want, you want the meetings to be run fairly effectively. You need them to be run legally so that the town is protected and the public, of course, gets their say, and that things are done above board and transparently. There is a little bit of work or knowledge or skill, I guess, in that sense, that you have to be a little careful. But it's not rocket science. I mean, you guys have all seen this before. We do it every month, right? So it's pretty straightforward. There is some additional communication and activity that happens. Joanne and I get copied on emails from the Board of Education if they have questions. There's been a few, as Joanne indicated, from the Board of Ed to the treasurer or to the town manager or to us, and you'd also may represent the Board of Finance in various, discussions, et cetera, that happen unofficially it's not off the record, but they're not a true board meeting. They're just, maybe it's discussions about the accounts or, what are we going to talk about? You also, Eric will typically reach out to us and say, here's the packet draft, do you have anything to add or change? We're going to publish it, on Monday. So get any changes to us, and typically there aren't any, but we do sometimes have some changes. That being said, there's no differential between the chair and the vice chair and any other member of the board in terms of those prerogatives. So, you know, if Bill were to contact the board or contact Eric or Kate and say, hey, I'd like to add an agenda item to the next meeting to discuss, you know, the town road fund, you know, then, you know, certainly that is within your prerogative also. There's nothing to prohibit that from happening. I mean, typically it would go through the chair, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And obviously within voting, the chair has no more say than anybody else, and the vice chair has no more say than anybody else. You just you are trying to direct the meetings efficiently. You're trying to do them fairly. You're trying to keep everybody on topic as much as possible, including the public, which is sometimes where things can go a little off. Not typically. I mean, we generally have pretty good understanding, and people are pretty concise and to the point when they do have their comments. But it is important to keep that in mind. Yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say. The last thing I'll add is that I am completely happy to hand this over to somebody else if somebody wants to take the reins for the following year. It is a little extra work, but it's not huge. You know, my job does keep me pretty busy along with some other things. So, you know, again, it's not a ton, but you know, it is something that I try to make sure that I'm at all the meetings that I can be, and I'm paying attention and interacting and answering questions where we can. So there's a little more work to it, but it's not a whole lot. Joanne, you got anything to comment on that?
No, I think you summed it up great, Mark. You know, it's good to be involved and be, you know, focused on things going around in town, I think, just so that we can bring, you know, the vice chair and chair and all members can bring points to the Board of Finance meetings and stuff like that. I do think it might be, I would lean more that it's nice to streamline the topics that we want to put on an agenda through the chair like we have been, or vice chair, but this is the first I knew that anyone could, you know, go straight to I understand that that's a good, you know, a good idea to keep open communication. I just think it's kind of nice to streamline it a little bit to see, you know, what topics we were going to cover that month or whatever. That would be my only thought, but if, you know, you're saying that should be open to everybody, I think that they kind of send things to us and then we kind of get together and put it in. I know you had suggestions last time. I had, you know, several questions last time and one made it to the agenda. That's all. Other than that, it's a group effort anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's definitely a more efficient way to run things. Then you have
Yeah.
everybody on board. And, you know, sometimes I may say, well, maybe fits better under this topic, and we're working out. You know, and of course, we always have the opportunity on regular board meetings to change the agenda. Excuse me, change the agenda. So, yeah, generally it would be better to go through the chair or vice chair, honestly, just because that way Eric's not getting, you know, hit from 4 different people. I mean, typically we don't add a lot. It tend to be a very repetitive agenda lineup that you've seen.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the process of nomination, you shouldn't wait for somebody to nominate you. If anybody would like to volunteer, is interested in doing the job or willing, you know, go ahead and speak up, because, you know, I'm not going to nominate Bill if I really think he doesn't want to do it, for example, you know, although I may nominate him anyway.
Well, just to be clear, Mark, you know, I know you're being very gracious about it, but you are willing to stay on if you were chosen, correct? You would serve?
I would, yeah, you know, I would, you know, either as chair or vice chair, you know, I'd be happy to, you know, probably more than happy to turn it over to somebody else. But I would certainly be there to support in any transition. You know, I just happen to have had some background in, you know, Robert's Rules of Orders, et cetera, that, you know, in parliamentary procedure, which kind of is helpful. And I went to a training class for the CCM, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, to put things on. But I still have that book that they gave us, the folder and that data, and I'd be happy to hand that to somebody else to take a look at. So
Mark, like
again,
like Robert said, you do have a good way of running a meeting, you know all the rules and all of that. We're all adding, knowledge. I'm certainly happy to, continue if that's the way it goes in my role as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and nominate you as, the chairperson. But I mean, again, whoever, people are willing to step up if you can't make it, I think everyone's shown that they're available or, willing to step in and pinch hit or whatever and run meetings, but you have a nice way of doing things, you present it well, yeah. And so I'm gonna go ahead and
I think-
nominate you.
I
as
think you heard
chairperson.
Kat's well, so I'm gonna second.
All right, I was just second, but go ahead, Rob, you got it.
Is that because I happen to be holding a cat, or did you?
Oh my goodness, didn't see the cat, but
Yeah, new kittens. they're
that's
all
on
over.
point, right
It's either
there.
this or they're on the
There it is.
keyboard, so
See,
I'm trying to
these are the
avoid the key.
skills that you need.
Mhm.
So we have a,
So,
Okay,
are we doing nomination for chair, vote on chair, nomination for vice chair, vote on vice chair?
yeah,
Is
I
that
would
the
do chair and
sequence?
vice chair separately.
Okay.
So
just-
any other nominations for chair? We have one from Joanne. Does anybody want to second that nomination?
Rob did.
Okay.
I did.
Sorry, okay.
I had to make a joke about it, but I did.
Yeah, that's right, you did. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Any other nominations?
Looks like it's you, dude.
Bill? Oh. He's shaking his head. Oh,
I've ducked it for 10 years.
okay, all right, well, I guess hearing none, any
Cheers.
discussion? All right, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I will abstain. All right, thank you, I guess, for your vote of confidence. Not sure it was the outcome I was really looking for, but
Aw.
Jeez.
that I
Um,
am willing to do what I can. Okay.
Thank you for your leadership.
That
Thank you
leaves
for your
the
service.
position of
Thank you for your
vice
leadership,
chair.
Mark.
So I'll nominate Joanne. I think she's done a great job
I'll second that.
as vice chair.
Okay,
Joanne, you
you
said,
accept the
right,
nomination?
you're
Yeah,
good to
I
go.
would definitely,
discussion?
I love the role of vice chair, and I'll happily accept it, so no problem, and I'm happy to step up when Mark's not available, that kind of thing. I didn't want to say too much while I'm nominating him. No, thank you. I'm
Yeah,
happy to do that.
Yeah, it's worked pretty well. I mean, Joanne's obviously spent a lot of time keeping in close touch, more time than I've spent certainly to keeping in close touch with the other boards and what's going on. So I think it's worked out pretty well. Okay, other nominations? Maybe we should have a vice chair so you can kind of pass the baton down the road. All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Do I abstain or,
Typically you would in
yeah,
your
so I'm
thing, but
abstaining.
It'll look good in the minutes. Don't worry.
if it was a tie vote, we'd ask you to break the tie, but typically you would. Yeah, and just one thing I should mention too is just it's just more tradition than the chair of the boards, who's ever chairing a meeting typically is not the person who would introduce motions. No reason you can't technically, but that's why I don't do it very often. It's appropriate and it gives the other board members an opportunity to make sure they have their say and state things the way they want them. So that way you're staying away from the chance you're dominating the proceedings as well.
Right. But there's no
Okay.
procedural reason you don't have to do that.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll move on. The next item is 6D, review changes to the town charter. I don't know if we have them in our packet. Don't think we,
No, I don't. I think we have Eric's recommendations for what to do about
yeah. So-
So if you want, I can share my screen with the
Yep.
sections, the new sections.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that, Eric?
Sure. Okay, hopefully you're seeing something with blue and red that starts
Yep.
with
Yes.
Chapter 8, Finance and Taxation.
Eric, can you make that full screen or?
I
Anything you
can
do with-
make it bigger.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Is
You
that
fine.
can't
better?
go, Can you?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. So the one caution I have is because not every line, everything passed in the budget, the town's attorney and the town clerk are still working through a little bit of a disagreement about what the final language is in the charter based on the things that pass and the things that didn't pass. But what I'm gonna pull out is the things that I know should be included. And the first is a requirement that, and one other thing, the majority of the charter changes don't go into effect till next July. But the things that relate to the budget explicitly go into effect as soon as they are voted on. So these changes are already the law of the land in the charter. Of course, as soon as the two of them agree on what that law of the land is. So the things that are going to affect us is that it says the Board of Finance shall confer with the other two boards and lay out your goals and objectives for the upcoming budget. And one of the things that's happened in a lot of prior years, but that the Board of Finance has gotten away from the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, is you can select or suggest targets for expenditures for each of the budgets. In fact, the Board of Finance in the past has given the Board of Ed a target, as well as given the the general government a target for what percentage increase or flatline or whatever that they would like. It doesn't mean the budget you're going to get back will actually conform to that, but it's guidance from you to both of those entities on what your expectations are. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it backs up the date at which each department head, each board or commission chair, everybody responsible for a section of the budget has to give that information into myself and the treasurer's office so it can be collated into the whole budget. And when we look at the next item, which is the budget process timeline, I took all the new dates that are in here as well as the new procedures and translated them into a timeline that I think is correct. But I'm happy to, you as a board can modify that any way you want at the end of the year. So the other thing that's different, it gives the Board of Ed a budget submission deadline of February 15th to present to you their budget. And it gives me a deadline of 120 days prior to July 1st or June 30th, actually, to present a budget to both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. Now, what this envisions is a series of budget review meetings in March. I think I can get a budget into your hands and into the Board of Selectmen's hands much earlier than that, because this is actually, normally by February 1st at the latest, I've given the Board of Selectmen essentially my completed budget. So they have a period to review. But since now the review period is going to be before both boards, and ultimately I think the Board of Finance should be the one setting the dates and times for that and just have both boards present so both boards can ask questions. At the end of the day, the Board of Finance is the one that's responsible for the budgets. And then here's the revised duties of the Board of Finance. And this gives you the dates when you have to hold the public hearing based on the end of the fiscal year and outlines when the annual town budget and referendum will be. So does anybody have any questions on that?
So first thing, I just want to ask, when will this be finished being reviewed, do you know, by the attorney? And when will we get a full copy of the amended, updated?
I don't have an answer for you. I kind of hoped we would have it already. Because I'm basing, my proposal for a timeline on what I think the final language is going to be. But I know all of this portion of it were things that got accepted or fell under the questions that were approved. So I'm pretty sure this is the language that will go into effect. What wasn't made mandatory is the quorum requirements for the annual budget are still in place. And the language that it would go automatically to referendum did not pass. So that's where they're trying to work out the differences between the revised language and what things passed and what things didn't, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So if I understand this correctly, I mean, it accelerates things slightly from where we've done it in the past, but it doesn't seem like that drastic change. The big thing that we're going to have to do is coordinate with obviously the other boards, and that's coming up in our agenda. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But long story short, I'm thinking about last budget cycle. And I don't remember exactly when AAS presented their budget to us, but the deadline that's now specified doesn't seem unreasonable. None of this seems undoable. My only concern going into all of this was whether we were compressing things so much that we'd be struggling to get through everything. But, it's done now and we're going to make it work. So
Right.
I looked at your schedule. I mean, it seems reasonable enough to me.
Yeah, I think what I proposed leaves you, even if you only do one meeting a week, still leaves you 7, budget workshops to review parts of the budget, which in most years seems to be as much or more than what the Board of Finance normally does.
Yep.
Yeah, we usually do. I feel like we do basically there's a 2-month stretch where we have a meeting a week.
Every week.
Between our regular meetings and our workshops, and we get through everything in that time. And that's holding to our attempts, and thank you, Mark, for this, to keep our meetings to 2 hours at a shot, because we had that one year where we went till 11:30 at night and it wasn't good. But if needs be, if at the uttermost extent of need, whatever, we have to have a longer meeting, so be it. But I like the idea of just it does seem like a good idea to get this stuff in front of everybody as soon as possible. Eric, you've done a good job in the past of collecting everything and getting it to us and keeping us informed. So I think we'll make it work.
The other thing I think that what this basically does is it has joint budget meetings between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So a lot of the time that Eric spends, explaining and going back, and then the Board of Selectmen, he's explaining the Board of Selectmen's position to us, and probably explaining the Board of Finance position, occasionally the Board of Selectmen. And, this way we're doing it generally all together. And so there's going to be some benefit there that we accrue. Yeah, Joanne?
That you're hitting on what I wanted to just clarify too. So we will be doing the majority of the meetings together. So that part does make sense. We'll all be hearing it firsthand rather than, I would attend all of those meetings too, and so did a lot of other board members. And then we'd come back and hear things and maybe we'd do a little corrections like, no, I heard it slightly different. So that does take away everybody would hear things firsthand. But this still, I know maybe I'm getting ahead of our agenda too, and I apologize. Will there be an ultimate meeting at the end where it is just the Board of Finance when we get down to all of, is that what this all?
But I think the public hearing is really a Board of Finance managed meeting. And then the Board of Finance, I'm not sure exactly how to say that.
Yeah, I'll get to it in a sec. But yes, so once you're done with the review,
Mhm.
you're responsible for coming up with ultimately, you're responsible for reviewing the budget estimates, essentially the reading between the lines. What really should be happening is the Board of Finance should be setting a meeting schedule and inviting the Board of Selectmen to attend. They may or may not attend all of the meetings, or some of them, or only the ones in the beginning, or I really don't know. But ultimately, the decision on the budget as a board is yours. And then what you are required to do is you are required to hold a public hearing once you've come up with your recommended budget. And then after the public hearing, you publish a final budget that goes to the annual town meeting. The only real difference is the time frame for that has been shifted up a couple of weeks based on when when the final referendum will be.
Mhm.
And Eric, I think I know the answer to this. I just want to make it clear for myself and maybe other new members. Even though there may be joint meetings, if there are things to be voted on, things of that nature, that is still the Board of Finance. The Board of Selectmen, while we're going through the budget process, doesn't vote on.
I think that's not really clear, Bill, honestly. That's something that I am, concerned about the language there. So what I would say is, as Eric said, ultimately it's the Board of Finance's job to come up with the recommended budget following the public hearing. So typically what we do is we've settled on a budget, more or less. We have a public hearing. At the end of the public hearing, we will make any changes based on that, or we will vote on the budget and pass it onto the town meeting. But the language, the way that it's written, really isn't clear about who, where the final, who gets to vote during these meetings as to what the recommended budget is.
Well, that's got to be cleared up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
pretty quick.
scary too, because I didn't
Because-
hear it that way when it
And
was
that-
presented. Yeah.
That goes to Joanne's point about whether we have that final meeting of our own
Mhm.
to, if we have these multiple meetings with the Board of Selectmen, and then at the end of the day, we have our last meeting and we make our decisions ourselves, then that preserves our role. If this changes that we're gonna have a multi-board decision-making process, well, that changes things rather dramatically. It also makes the meetings potentially much more unwieldy.
Very
So,
unwieldy. That
Well,
was my
I will
concern.
say that there is nothing in this charter language that prohibits us from having a final Board of Finance only meeting. It just says there shall be budget review meetings in March, which shall be joint meetings of the Board of Selectmen, Board
and
of
I think
Finance.
I think
So-
if we look at that in good faith and say, okay, I don't think the Board of Selectmen is trying to, take over our role. It's just they think it would be good to coordinate, and I agree with them on that. Then I think we'll be okay. I think, though, that we should, in fact, make sure that we schedule one Board of Finance only meeting right before we go to public hearing.
But I'm
That's
just
my
saying, like, in the case of a motion, let's just talk about the board or the new director or the community center. There was a lot of discussion and motions made concerning what that salary would be, let's just say. And again, that in my mind is the Board of Finance. It's not the Board of Selectmen or a joint board. Those decisions are always as the budget's being heard. It's nice to have their input, but in my mind anyways, I can't foresee them actually having votes.
Well,
Motions.
Well, Mark, I just want to get this question in. What leads you to believe? Where are you seeing because that, especially with
huge.
you I value your opinion on this. Where are you seeing that they might get votes and things like that? What exact line leads you to think that it's not clear? The D with
yeah,
the,
right there in front of us. I mean, it's not
no, I
clear.
just wanted it to be literal.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
stated in that review meeting that Jeff McGuire held that I believe it was stated, the Board of Finance is the town's board that makes the financial decisions, which leads me to believe the voting and all of that there. Not, we listen to the review, we'll get together, but I'm hearing it on a whole different level now than all the meetings that I
Yeah,
thought
well,
were explained.
I think it's a little confusing, right? So one thing to think about is what's happened in the past, and typically, and I don't attend the Board of Finance, or I'm sorry, the Board of Selectmen's budget review meetings typically.
Mhm.
I know Eric puts together a proposed budget, then he works it out with them, they make changes, right? So, and then what we get is pretty much a final product, right? And then we can make changes following our discussion. So I don't think anybody's trying to usurp any power. It's just not clear at these joint meetings who has voting rights. I think it is clear that the Board of Finance is the jurisdictional authority in terms of producing the budget for the town hearing, the public hearing, and for the recommended budget for the town meeting. I think that that's pretty clear. It's just that there's a lot of gray in the way that this is written.
Okay,
I don't
thank
think it's
you.
a problem.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a major problem, or I'd raise my hand long ago, but I just think it's just something we're gonna have to work out.
But I think
Can I
it's
ask a
good that
question?
we have this forum right now to say that Bill has said it, I've said it, Rob has said it,
Somebody's got to answer the question.
that, we are hoping that it is as it has been in the past, and that's the way it was presented at any kind of meeting that I went to, that these would be joint meetings where the budget's gonna be discussed. And like you said, if it is gray areas, then it should be cleared up, like Bill
It needs to
said.
be clear
I
up
think
immediately.
just the real question just ends up being that the Board of Finance is gonna have to have the final decision on the recommended budget. I don't think anybody's gonna dispute that. I mean, it basically states that as a rule, or as the, duty of the Board of Finance. It says it really an E there, right? So I'm not sure what that whole section would end up reading.
Can I ask a question about getting back to D again, real quick?
Yep.
At the end of D, it says a quorum of at least one of the two boards is required, to conduct business.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean to just simply hold the meeting and discuss?
Yeah.
Discuss
Yeah.
it, or in order to vote?
Well,
Would
To
there
have
be?
the meeting at all, you have to have a quorum of either board. You have to have a
yeah,
quorum.
so
Either
conducting business can just be reviewing the budget figures. It doesn't necessarily, if you had 3 Board of Finance members and 2 Board of Selectmen members, you would not be able to hold a meeting because you don't have a quorum of either board. But if you had 3 Board of Selectmen members, in theory, that's all you need, right? Hopefully that's not kind of how it rolls. And I think that the language it's vague, but and a little ambiguous, but I think it's not unmanageable. I think we just have to get with the spirit from which it's intended. So, but it's a little, it's not really clear, who sets the meeting dates, who chairs the meetings, who has voting rights in these meetings, So those things were not well thought out in terms of this language, and it might have made it too complicated to do that. But it is kind of what we have, and I think it's one of these things we try and we see how it works out. And if we run into problems, we may have to think about the change. So,
But Mark, I think what everybody's voicing is that we want the language clarified before we start the process.
can't do that. We just had an election, and this is the language. Unless you're talking about like a legal opinion and as to what it means.
I would like a legal opinion, yeah, I guess, of
Yeah.
what
I
it
mean,
means.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, I kind of see what Mark's saying though. I mean, we just had an election on this.
But you
I
can't
think
go
we-
into this with gray unanswered questions. We have to know the role when we go into these meetings. People have to know what the role is.
I mean, I'm inclined toward that. At the same time, I'm inclined to also say that we can muddle through and see how it goes, and the issues will become, how do I say, clarified, I guess, as we go through this, and it'll highlight them, and we may have to go from there.
Well, this may be something we can clear up in that tri-board meeting, propose,
Yeah.
propose like, hey, this is how we see this going forward. We have joint meetings that are informational, people put in their input, and then we, ultimately the Board of Finance will hold a final meeting, vote on the end result, and then that'll be what goes to public hearing and then ultimately to the town meeting.
I see that too, Mark, and I appreciate that, and hopefully it all flows together nicely. Eric had said something at the beginning that most of the changes to the charter won't take place until next July, which is after our budget season. What makes it, where is it stated? Because another point that was brought up to me was that we are rushing to enact this now. I know it got voted and the charter got changed and everything, but so I'm curious what makes the budget questions have to happen now, but all, what makes the two things?
I think it's because of what the charter says.
Oh,
Right,
it- I never read
was-
the full-blown charter. Oh, it said that the budget will go in. Thank you. That's all.
Well, yeah, it
that's an
was-
easy answer.
right, it was
But I mean, it was
spelled out in the charter review process
Okay.
that at most things would go into effect July. However, the things that related to the budget would go into effect immediately upon adoption.
Thank you. That's an easy answer, and I don't mind asking the question because I wanted to know, and I didn't read that line, so,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Mhm.
Other comments? Louise, did you have something? Or was that Liz earlier that she's asked it?
Nope, you answered my quorum question.
I was actually gonna answer what Eric just said, because I remember him saying that the budget changes go into effect right away.
Any further comments or questions or anything else, Eric, we need to review here in terms of this?
No, I was gonna say if you wanted, can you see the suggested schedule? That's kind of the next item up,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
one flows into the next.
Yeah, I had looked at this.
Yep.
Yep.
It doesn't seem, it seems like a decent sketch. Obviously October 15th, things going into effect immediately. Obviously, we've
do
missed,
that one.
we're already past that.
Right.
So we're gonna try to have our meeting as soon as possible instead. But other than that, this all seems quite reasonable to me.
Claire.
February 15th, that gives us a couple of weeks to get to March. Yeah, I mean, this works. I mean, we're gonna fit our budget workshops in between these other dates.
And to be honest, the funny thing is this doesn't crunch me anymore. In fact, I produce my initial budget roughly the same time under this schedule. The only thing we're really doing is we're just eliminating 5 weeks or 6 weeks of the Board of Selectmen meeting and discussing the budget before it goes to the Board of
Yeah,
Finance.
those two project paths are now combined into one.
Correct.
So they overlap in a sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And there is some flexibility in the dates for these, like when we get a little closer, you guys will have to decide. I mean, I gave you a proposed schedule of when you could start budget meetings. You can choose to start later. I suppose you could choose to start a week earlier if you wanted, and I could probably do that if you felt you needed one more week. And then there's some new language that says you got to do the public hearing not less than 85 days before the end of the fiscal year. It used to be 60. So it's back to that, up about 25 days for that. So the last possible day is April 4th. But the problem is that if you do it April 4th, we still have to send out a mailer 5 days before the budget meeting. So then you're pushing the budget meeting towards the end and making it harder to comply with the referendum schedule. So there's some flexibility. If you have specific dates now you wanted to identify things, I would change it and send it back out with that. Or you can kind of adopt something, but just leave that range there for now. And when it gets a little closer, select the exact dates that you want.
Eric, I have a question on the budget hearing date. Like you said there's new language that says it has to happen not less than 85 days. Did
Correct.
we change that? Are you saying because I was going to, when I looked at your timeline, I seem to remember whatever the dates led up to, and we had the budget hearing. The budget hearing seemed to be very close to the town meeting, correct? Didn't it always kind of, we'd have a budget hearing, and if everything went through and we gave final revisions, I feel like the budget meeting, which is going to take place according to this, April 9th now.
Yep.
Yes,
So there's
correct.
that big cushion before we vote on it in May, right? There's that month in between. I just didn't know why we would have done that. What purpose did it add to adding time? Because the 60 days, everything could have been kind of closer together, fresher. Yeah, I feel like
I
we're
was
doing
not
so
on-
many things up front, but then we have to do this hearing early because of the new language. And then, when we actually have the meeting, yeah, I wasn't following the thought of why we had to do that, or why we didn't change it to be more friendly to the process. If we were changing the charter so many items.
Well, the one thing this would give you, and in my mind, by doing it April 9th, and then having the budget hearing no later than April 2nd, then, so the April 2nd to April 9th gives you 7 days to get the mailer out and make sure you can get the mailer out on time, which is because you're required to get it out 5 days ahead of time. That gives you a little bit of leeway, to work with it.
Yeah.
We've cut it down to exactly 5 days before, or 6 days before, because that's the minimum we can legally do, which is us putting the mailer out the day after you have your public hearing, and putting the announcement out. By doing April 9th for the annual town budget meeting, if the initial, now that it doesn't automatically go to referendum, it can still fail at the town budget meeting. You could theoretically have another budget meeting the next week, and maybe even another budget meeting, town budget meeting the week after. So you might be able to have 2 budget failures and still make the May 6th referendum date. So I think that's why they pushed those deadlines back, but I wasn't on the commission, so I don't know that for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I just didn't understand why it was such a gap, and I wanted things to be more fresh in people's head, being more topical. It just seems like a big gap of time, but they're trying to keep things on schedule in case there were, instead of pushing it the other way, they feel like they'd have some weeks in between to have additional meetings and hopefully get one to pass. All right. Yeah, I could not make sense of that whole timeline at all with the end part of your timeline. Thanks.
Yeah, I had to break out a calendar and count the days for each step, to figure out where it would fall.
Yeah.
Because they refer to different things by dates or by specific date ranges. So
Can I ask a question real quick, Eric? Just
certainly.
Guys, let's-
just to clarify, can you go back down a teeny bit in this month of March, April? Can you just clarify for me this send to budget to the town meeting on the 24th or earlier? That's March 24th, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So because it has to be 85 days before the end of the fiscal year, 85 days before the end of the fiscal year is April 4th. So that sets the last possible day for a finance board public hearing. But as far as I know, I think that's like a Sunday or a Saturday. So you're probably not going to hold the budget meeting on a Saturday. You're probably going to hold it on a weekday, so
Right.
that's the week that you would hold it.
I just wanted to clarify that that was actually March, because I was assuming it was, but I didn't want to assume it and then find out that I shouldn't have assumed it because it was wrong. So
Right.
March 24th. Okay,
Correct.
all right. Thank you.
I have a question as well for
Mhm.
the Saturday. February 15th is a Saturday for the Board of Ed to submit the budget to the Board of Finance. Is
Right.
that, could it be the 14th or the 15th?
It just says they have to do it by the 15th. That's language straight out of the charter.
So
By the 15th,
Yeah.
okay.
midnight on the 15th, probably, yeah.
You
Does it
know, and the 15th is going to fall on different days depending on
Yeah.
the budget year. So,
Yep, okay, thanks.
of course, I suppose if they wanted to wait until the Saturday and submit it on the Saturday to you all, they legally could.
Mhm.
So if you could scroll down a little bit again, all of this seems to, come together. We just kind of meet, well, we don't have to tonight, but it would behoove us, I think, to plan for a tentative date for the town budget meeting and for the public hearing. So Eric, you're saying that we'd have to vote to send the budget to town meeting on the 24th of March or earlier. So the 24th is a Monday. So if we were to hold the town budget meeting on a Tuesday or Wednesday, which is normally what we would do, it need to be there the 18th or 19th.
Well, hold on.
Wait,
So
yeah, I don't think
where
so.
that's not quite correct is what I meant to say is you would have to vote to send to go to your public hearing.
To the public hearing, so not
Right.
the town meeting. Okay, yeah, I was
You have to put a
Yeah.
budget to the public hearing, not to the town meeting. So that's
just
an
open a
error on my
calendar and
part.
it seems like, yeah, that was too much. Okay.
Right. So I'll correct that. That was an error in my
So
document.
then what we were talking about is that we would need to have the town meeting no later than or technically no later than April 4th, or I'm sorry, not the town meeting, the budget hearing no later than April 4th, but April 2nd would give us a couple more days, and that April 2nd is a Wednesday. So it seems like an appropriate day to have schedule the budget hearing.
Mhm.
So looking at my calendar, I think we scheduled a regular Board of Finance meeting March 26th. Right smack in between those two dates.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to do something with that or leave it.
Well,
but just
honestly,
bringing it
it's
up.
probably a good meeting by which we finalize the budget based on our discussions with the Board of Selectmen. We finalize the budget to be discussed at the town meeting the following Wednesday, which would be April 2nd.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
Town meeting or the public hearing?
Public hearing.
Public hearing.
Hearing, right?
The
Hearing.
Public
on
hearing
the
on
2nd.
April 2nd, the town meeting on the 9th. So Board of Finance meeting on the 26th, public hearing on the April 2nd, and town meeting on April 9th. That's what this sounds like, right?
Correct.
My thought is, do we have to set those tonight, Mark, or we make sure that they all make sense, and if everyone's in agreement that they want to set them, I'm thinking, can we just, make sure all of this all makes sense, and then we just set the dates next month? Keeping this.
Yeah, we can. I mean, this is just
I mean, since it's
a guideline.
December and this all just passed and we're kind of dealing with all the.
Yeah,
getting
this
all of our-
isn't,
Yeah,
this isn't committing us to anything, so we can just,
okay,
I think we can just verbally have stated that this is it,
Yeah.
but I do think there's value in giving the other boards basically an idea of what we're gonna do. We can do that verbally, or we can, you know.
I think it's great that we're discussing it. It makes sense. I thought we were setting it in stone right now, and I was hoping we could do that next month if.
No, I think there's nothing that has to
Okay.
do that, you
Oh,
know.
okay, thank you.
And please review the charter and review this. Because I looked at it and I think I got all the dates that corresponded to the
Yeah.
charter changes. But it's just me. I haven't, and I've sent it to the town's attorney, but I haven't gotten anything back from him. So this is just what I think the charter says. And hey, I could be wrong. I'm not a, you know.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's great to state it verbally, maybe just all of us go over it one more time and, just make sure.
Absolutely, and we can
Yeah.
adapt as needed, you know,
Yeah.
we have time. I think in January, we need to set our meeting schedule with the Board of Selectmen. We have time. We don't need to do that right away. Just sometime in January, find a time that's amenable to them. Again, then maybe that's something that can discuss briefly at the tri-board meeting, although we have a lot of
Exactly.
things going on.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, that sounds like we covered the changes to the charter and the budget process timeline. Any further questions or comments on those? Okay, so the next agenda item is 6F, which is the tri-board meeting date and agenda. I think you all have seen the emails, mostly from Joanne, asking about dates that are available. Originally, the 3rd looked like a good date, but the superintendent can't be there, and the Board of Ed certainly felt that was important that she be there. So then the 4th was proposed. Sounded like for most of you, that was a possibility. Again, it doesn't have to be everybody there. Attendance would be helpful for sure. This is our opportunity to kind of get together, air out any issues and discuss any, probably discuss the budget timeline, tell them kind of what we're presenting. Maybe we can, as Eric said, suggested, we can give them some targets, and I will say that I would hope they wouldn't come up with anything more than 2 or 3% increase. But there are some things outside of our control. I think you all also saw that thing about the potential grand list for the automotive taxation grand list changing too. So
Was it just automotive, or was it also your property, your house?
it's mostly automotive. The way they're valuing the automotive.
I thought it was included house, but not property. All right, okay.
No,
I
so
think it's just trailers, RVs were discussed, how
Okay.
they, but mostly is how they value the, they're gonna depreciate the car, the auto value from the retail value over time, basically, with some residual value after, I don't know, 17 years. Or
Instead of blue book value or 8AA value or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly. No more of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
right.
Yep.
And
And
they
the
also
bottom
talk-
line is none of the towns really know how it's gonna be. Because when they did this, they never really did a study which said on average, how much does it affect the rates? So the assessors all think it's going to decrease the grand list, but nobody knows how much. And we also don't know, there's a couple other things. One, they took trailers essentially off the grand list. So we're definitely gonna lose some revenue for that. So if you have a motor home, that stays on the grand list, but if you just have a giant fifth wheeler, as far as I know, that comes off the grand list now, so that will no longer be taxable.
For
And
private
then-
owners, not commercial. Commercial stays on.
Right, and then there's a rebate or and they're still working through the details of this, because this is not what the final way it was executed by the state is not exactly how the legislature passed it, but there is a a clause now that a veteran that is 100% disabled
Mhm.
will get 100% property tax, but just on their house. So not on their land, but on their house.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying a
So-
minute ago. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's
Oh,
it's
that
very
part, yeah,
convoluted.
that's what I was talking about.
And the difference is if there's a couple different ways you can look at somebody you can have something that's 100% service-related disability, or you could have somebody that has a 20% disability for hearing loss and a 10% disability for PTSD, and stack a few other things. And if it gets up to the category where it's considered 100% disabled, then they fall in that category. So there's a lot of gray with it. Last time I heard, I think we had 9 residents in Andover that applied for the complete exemption. How many of them will actually qualify, I don't know. But that will definitely affect the grand list also. So, so in a normal year, we have between, usually 1.5% and 2.5% appreciation of the grand list. In other words, the town budget can go up by 2.5% and be mill rate neutral. In this year, we don't know. So we probably don't have that a cushion that we have in a lot of years.
Can I bring it back to the tri-board meet? Thank you, Eric, for that. I mean, that's something we'll have to see in the future, not to,
Yep.
but I did read that with interest too. Just the tri-board meeting, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Definitely, I know Mark already brought up that the topic that the budget will come up, I'm sure. All of the boards wanted to make sure that we definitely focused a little bit on, last year we had the meeting and this will be our second one together, just how to have the boards, cohesively work together. Whoever had, I had sent an email out that if anybody has ideas that they want to put on the agenda, please send them to me. I don't think I will get in touch with Caitlin Greenhouse, who had brought this up. She was involved the last time with Paula when she was a board of selectmen. The 3 of us kind of took ideas, put the agenda together. So again, if anyone had any, hopefully it's going to be a nice meeting. Yeah.
Where's
I
that
think I'll
meeting?
be-
When's that meeting
I
gonna be
want-
again?
I want to clarify, it's the 4th at 7?
Well, I was gonna ask both Rob and Bill if they were available. It's December 4th at 7. It's
That's a Wednesday. That works
Yeah.
for me. Wednesdays are fine.
Tuesday.
Thanks.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wednesday at 7.
yep, December 4th. So I believe that's in 2 weeks, right? The week after Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Yeah.
We thought, let's try to stick to the beginning of December if we could, just because all of our boards will have other meetings and with the holidays and such. So when December 3rd was out, I threw out the date of December 4th. Let's try to hope. for
Yeah,
the first week.
look, I'll never complain about a Wednesday or a Thursday. Those are my days that are the best. So, I know everybody sometimes are really great about working around me, because Mondays or Tuesdays are often hard for me. But yeah, that Wednesday's the 4th, that works fine.
Right.
Is
That's
that a
great.
Zoom meeting or is that a,
I believe it's gonna be in person.
Okay.
We had
Oh.
the last one in person, which was pretty effective. I
That's
mean, I will,
true.
Yeah, it wasn't really fully determined, so.
yeah, I mean, we
Let's
can find
get
out.
clarity on that.
Yeah,
if you can send out a note on that?
yeah. I'll add it on to, I had sent something, but I will find out, once we had this meeting, I'll reach out to Caitlin, see where we are with things and.
So as far as I know, the Board of Selectmen agrees to the 4th.
Oh,
3 of
thank
the
you,
4 board members and I can make it. The other 1 board member hasn't responded yet, but you certainly have quorum of the Board of Selectmen at that meeting at this point.
It's actually pretty good
Yeah,
turnout.
that's
so.
good. Good. I
All
haven't
right.
seen with them. Yeah.
That sounds
perfect.
good.
So the question I had relative to that meeting is, does the Board of Finance want to set specific targets both for the general budget and the ed budget. Because if you do, you probably ought to make that decision prior to the meeting, because once you're in the tri-board meeting, you're not really going to be able to discuss it among yourself to set that.
You're asking us now if we want to do that at that meeting that we're
No,
getting.
not prior.
So what I'm saying is that if you read what the charter says, it suggests that when you have that preliminary meeting with the boards, that you can identify a target
Oh,
for
no, I
both the
understand.
education budget and the town budget. Doesn't say you have to, just that you can. So if you're gonna do it, you would have to agree to it ahead of time. So that's why I'm bringing it up now.
I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that was the nature. Thank you for your input, but I don't think that was the nature of why they wanted this meeting, in my opinion. I'll listen to what the board members say. It definitely wasn't driven by the budget. It definitely wasn't driven by, I feel like that's coming in way too budget heavy. I have no problem with us, if we do have targets, and us discussing that as a board eventually. But I feel like that's starting that meeting off. I feel like we're gearing it all till that. Does anyone else feel differently?
Not necessarily, but again, according to the charter, we really are technically supposed to have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen to discuss the budget. So, when some of us were talking about this joint meeting, that's what I thought we were talking about doing, is having this meeting be that kickoff meeting. But I think Caitlin or whoever else had suggested starting it actually was just didn't have that in their head. They were really just thinking bringing this to the boards together
Exactly.
for that discussion again. So we could do either. Technically we're supposed to have that joint meeting. If this isn't it, I don't know when we would have it, honestly. It would maybe be January, which is a little bit late to kind of give guidance or whatnot. An alternative would be if we were to vote on, come up with recommended budget guidelines, like, increase limits or, decrease or whatever we want to do. We could, in theory, just communicate that to them through a memo or something else, or do it outside of this meeting. So if this December 4th meeting is not that meeting to discuss the budget, then we either need to decide we're going to have one probably in January, or we're going to do some other mechanism this first year.
And Mark, the reason for me saying that, I have no problem with us doing that. I just feel like here comes that pressure thing again. I feel like now we're, by it, I feel it. Like, I feel like I want to be a lot, and I feel pretty educated as it is. I'm very involved. I go to a lot of things. I feel like I don't have enough info to all of a sudden do that right now, unless
Yeah,
and I
what
go
would
everywhere. So
what would be
I just,
basing our input on? To
Well-
your point, Joanne.
what, Bill? Sorry.
Well, your point is taken. What would we be basing
Right. Thank you.
that on? We don't have
Right.
any information yet, so how can we make any recommendation at this point?
Yeah, I feel like, thank you. That's how I feel. I feel like there's time for it, and whether it gets communicated by a memo, once we get some facts and we're able to digest it a little, we'll have no problem doing that. I think we're all gonna have to, dig down. I just think it's a little premature to do it in 2 weeks with Thanksgiving holiday in between,
Mhm.
and thinking that all of us are gonna do our due diligence and boom, 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 have all the answers. So thanks for the agreement, because I feel rushed with that, because I'd like to prepare.
Well,
But
in
maybe
that case, then like I said, we'll have to decide separately. And I understand the sentiment. I certainly do, because it does seem like a lot, and things change quickly with this charter change. All of a sudden we're kind of up against this new schedule, which again, as I've said before, I think we can manage. But it does kind of throw this whole thing about the early meeting into a gray spot, because it's past October 15th.
And we can gloss over discussing the budget and say that things are gonna be forthcoming. I have no problem with that. I just don't want to Eric's point, have to have our targets ready and prepared.
Right.
I mean, it can be glossed over in a nice way as we're discussing different things and say, hey, this could happen, and then, then.
We would not be remiss to visit the schedule, at least.
Right,
process and schedule.
right. And discussing
That's
items
pretty
like that.
neutral, and that's just that's just solid, good
Planning.
communication and management, right? So everyone's aware of it.
Yep.
So what I think is that the Board of Ed's budget to some extent influences the town's budget and vice versa. So what I had put out to Caitlin and others is that what I thought was probably appropriate is that from the Board of Finance position, you guys outline the revised budget process. And I've given you the memo to what that's likely going to be. And if you want to change that, you can. But I've given you a timeline, which I think works. Set some sort of expectation for the other boards. If you want, it sounds like you don't want to, and that's okay too. You're not obligated to, it's just you have the option to do it at that meeting. And then 3, make sure that all the entities understand the ramifications for the other budget pressures that are going to be on the grand list. Because regardless of what anybody wants to budget, we all know roughly what the public will accept for a mill rate increase, because we've had plenty of practice in the past of trying to push a bigger mill rate through than the public will accept in getting it kicked back. So we should kind of know that going in. And that's information you should be providing to the 2 other entities,
And we will,
from my
like we
perspective.
said, like in due time, like we will gather all those facts, and if we think we have to make our recommendations as a board, I'm sure all of us together will do that. And I have a lot of confidence that there's a lot of us that will be behind that, whatever we think. But just in 2 weeks, we can't possibly be ready. But like we were just trying to say, because I saw that email you sent, Eric, and she's the one that I'm going off of too, because I think she responded to you that she thought it wasn't going to be budget heavy, but the budget can be discussed. So
Then you should probably, as a board, schedule another date and invite the other 2 boards. Because now you have an
Well, we will. We're gonna
obligation
let
by your
that
charter
meeting-
to do that.
I think you're trying to run, and I appreciate so much your input because we value it, but I think we will do that, and we just said we will. It's just that with Thanksgiving next week, and then that first, get together, then we'll either decide by memo or whatever. We'll kind of act on whatever happens on that meeting, how we should proceed. If the conversations are going great and suggestions are asked for and open dialogue happens, maybe that will happen, but I think we should go into that meeting not setting that as the major, focus.
Okay.
Unless, again, I don't want to keep speaking. I've just been in the communication, so I'm trying to honor it. Plus, I like to, like Bill said, like others have said, we want to be prepared. We have nothing to go on, but prior years. So we'll get there. I mean, we're gonna adhere to this timeline. We'll make our suggestions. We're up for it.
So my one comment would be vis-a-vis setting targets. If we wanted to, you could set targets not based on what we're hearing from departments and what's needed. You can set targets based on what you think is passable. Now, I'm not saying that's the way that you should work up a budget necessarily, but you could say going in, okay, target 2% or target 1.5% or whatever, pick a number, it doesn't matter. The argument would be this gives guidance to the various departments and boards and what have you as they're working up their budgets to try to come close to that number. It doesn't mean that it is set in stone. It's not holy writ. It's a
The
target,
guideline.
a guideline,
It's a
as opposed
guideline.
to an actual rule. Exactly.
Right.
So I'm agnostic on this, honestly, guys. I could go either way. I would be totally happy to roll in and say, hey guys, try to hit 2%. Or go in and just have a dialogue and not do that.
Mhm.
But I also don't think we have, the whole idea behind a guideline, behind a target is that you don't, of course, you don't have all the information yet. That's the point. You're sort of directing them to try and pull their things together and hit something in that range, roughly. It's a, again, it's a guideline. It's not supposed to be, everybody would understand, I think, coming in November or sorry, early December, that we don't have in front of us all the asks from each department and commission. I mean, that's a given. So I could go either way on this. Frankly, I'm agnostic. I could go your way, Joanne. I could go the other way and pick a target. I honestly don't care. But I guess I'm just throwing it out there as I think that's what's in the intent behind this. I think that's what people were thinking.
Yeah, I would agree. I think
sense.
that's what the intention of the meeting and the charter was, but it sounds like there's not really an appetite right now for the board to do that, at least at this meeting. In order to get into substantive discussions of the budget in the tri-board meeting, other than to, talk about the process and whatnot. So, if anybody wants to make a motion to something different, that's fine, but I would say let's move on. Because I think we've kind of got what we're going to get out of this. We could talk about this in circles all night.
Yeah, eventually, I just want to add, eventually, I definitely, thank you, Rob, for clarifying that. I was focusing on the tri-board meeting and I know who's going to be there. So yeah,
Okay.
we'll discuss it in the future, like you said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. I wanted to give my
No,
two
good
cents,
points
but
taken. I do understand that process
You
and we're
know.
going to want to do something like that. We definitely
Yeah.
are. Because
we have our multi-year experience with passing budgets, and we can come up with numbers, and it doesn't mean that means that we actually know what town aid road needs to be,
Mhm.
Right.
what have you.
Well,
So
let's, if we could, again, we're just going to
Yeah.
talk in
Let's
circles
move on.
here.
Yeah, you're right.
I'd like to
Yeah.
move on,
Thank
guys.
you.
It's
Yeah.
getting late.
Yeah.
I'm pretty tired. So.
Me too. I'm with you. I'm with you.
If nobody has any objections, let's move on to the next item, which is the recommendation for credit card policy. You have a note, information only here. Eric?
Yeah, so I put that in the policy, the treasurer's, because she's completed the audit prep for this year and turned over the audit book to the auditor. This has been on her wish list for a while, to gain better control over the credit card. When we first adopted a policy, it was adopted in 2019, when we brought in 2 credit cards for the town. And she's recommended that we tighten up some of the policies. The Board of Selectmen couldn't agree to that. So it's in limbo right now, but I think we are going to end up to some extent changing the credit card policy, in part because our current policy does not really match the charter. The charter basically says I have to approve all expenditures before they're made. But the old credit card policy pushed that responsibility onto the department head and the responsibility for forwarding the paperwork. And then I'm supposed to approve it later. Well, it kind of doesn't make sense for me to approve it later because the purchases are already made. So what am I approving? So that's in progress. I left it in there. I gave you the drafts of all the documents. If you have any comments, I'm certainly willing to take it. Ultimately, I think that's a Board of Selectmen decision, probably not a Board of Finance decision in this case, but if you have any guidance, I'm happy to pass it along.
Okay. I probably would agree with that. It is kind of an executive, process policy type thing. It's not really about expenditures per se, but how they're handled internally. I mean, we are responsible for checks and balances to some degree. Anybody have any other questions or comments? Or, you're gonna, I assume, fill this in as if and when it moves further through the Board of Selectmen.
Sure.
No, nobody's got anything. I guess we'll move on to 6H, which is establish banking relationship with Webster. And you alluded to this earlier, Eric. You want to give us the rundown?
Sure. So the treasurer and I have gone out and interviewed multiple banks. We've been trying to get away from M&T for a while because their customer service has been horrendous. Basically, we no longer have Brinks pickup from our deposits. We have to bring all the deposits to the bank, even though they promised us for the last year and a half that they would reinstate that. They've never managed to be able to, and Brinks still thinks the town owes them money because when they took over from Peoples, they just stopped paying Brinks. That's just one example. The other example is we cannot get the ability to examine our credit card transactions in real time. They just have never been able to give us that ability, which is crazy because if something happens or there's a fraud alert or something like that, we have no way to monitor that in real time. And every time that has to happen, I have to go in and talk to the branch manager or the assistant manager and do all that in person, which is kind of a waste of my time. So we've been extremely frustrated with M&T. That seems to be pretty common sentiment among the towns that still retain them for finances. We looked at Jewett City Savings Bank. We looked at Webster, and we looked at Key Bank. Webster seems to be the one that's most responsible for municipal banking in this area, and most of the towns that have Webster accounts are reasonably happy with them. So what we want to do is not do everything at once and then decide 6 months from now they're no better than what they were. We want to establish a relationship, change some of our accounts there for things which aren't really liquid. In other words, things we don't have to get stuff in and out of very readily. Also take advantage of the fact that they will offer us a money market account, which has a 5% interest rate, which we can put some of the money in. And then it's a secured money market account, and it has basically the same rate of return for the stiff account. So that's what we're talking about doing. Also switching our credit cards to that account from M&T's credit cards. And then the last thing is requesting from them a line of credit prior to us starting the bridge project in February. And the reason is, although those bridges are 100% funded, we are on the hook as a town to pay the contractor and the construction inspection bills and then apply to the state and federal government for reimbursement. So we've had a meeting with the contractor and the construction inspector, and what we came up with is that for the most part, we have enough money in our Bunker Hill Bridge account that we can pay the bills, but there will be one, maybe two occasions where we're going to be way over what's in that account. So we need a swing reserve, essentially a line of credit to pay that and wait to get reimbursed. So that's kind of what we're looking to do. I've asked Dennis whether we need public approval for that or whether that can be just approved by Board of Finance. I don't have that answer yet, but I wanted to discuss that with you. In worst case scenario, we could pay for that out of our unexpended fund balance, because none of these bills are going to be bigger than what we have in unexpended fund balance. I'm just uncomfortable with, basically spending $1 million out of the reserve and taking it down too far in case there is another emergency. Low probability, but I would be more comfortable taking that from, for the month or two between when we pay the money and when we get rebated, run that off of line of credit. Because even if we're spending 4 or 5% interest annually, in a month, that's not going to be a big payment. So it doesn't represent a big expense to us.
Yeah,
But
that was my big question, was what would that cost us versus, yeah, floating it off of our own savings. What's the swing there? How much are we talking about, Eric? Like order of magnitude. It doesn't have to be exact.
well, if you think about it, if we pull it out of our unexpended fund balance, that's money we're currently earning 5% interest.
Yep.
So we would not be getting 5% interest on $1 million, let's say.
Right.
So that's one option. Option number two is if we're getting a loan, it looks like our loan rate is going to be somewhere in the sixes, because I mean, we are a good, it is basically it would be a secured line of credit because we're borrowing money that we already have grant funds to recover from. So I think the net is only going to be a couple % difference by leaving it in stiff and tax. And even if we're paying 6.8%, we're still only really netting a couple of % difference on that $1 million.
The 1.8% annualized for a couple of months on
Yeah.
$1 million.
It's nothing.
What are we? I don't know. I can't. This is the part where I don't have the math.
Yeah. What kind of magnitude are we talking, Eric? I mean,
That's what I'm saying. What are we talking about? Are we talking about $5,000? Are we talking about 10? What do we?
Yeah, I looked at it and said, so on $1 million, we make approximately $50,000 per year. So if you rounded it off, we make about 4,000 a month. So it would be less than that. So we're not talking about big dollars.
Probably talk about 1,000, maybe 1,200. If we're talking about
what I'm asking is how
point and a
large
half
is the line
swing.
of credit are you looking at? Are we talking about borrowing, 50,000, 100,000, $500,000? What is it?
I would set to borrow up to $1 million.
Okay.
I don't think we actually probably need to be borrowing more than $500,000 because we already have $500,000 in the fund to reimburse and get that reimbursed. But it's certainly going to be in the range. We should never be out between our payments and our reimbursements. We should never be out more than $1 million.
Eric,
That would be the upper end.
I was just wondering, typically your experience, and I don't know how much experience you have with this, is the state good at reimbursing? Like, are we going to get it in a month, or is it like other stuff where you're going to wait months, years? Like,
No, I mean, as far as I understand from talking to our construction inspector, the worst we would be out from a payment requisition to a check in the door is 6 weeks.
okay. All right. I just wasn't sure how much experience you had with getting reimbursed from the state, but if any.
Well, this is federal too, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
and federal. Yeah, that's
right. The majority of the money comes back from the federal government, but about 20% of it comes from the state. So it's 80 federal, 20% state. But the state money is actually passed through federal ARPA funds anyway. So ultimately, it all comes from federal dollars, but some of it passes through the state and some of it comes directly from the federal government.
certainly sounds like a good idea to have that line of credit again.
Yeah, I think probably you want to have it, kind of out in front of us, like what are the numbers, and you guys, are you comfortable with we'll vote on it at a meeting and just say, are we comfortable with opening, okay to approve that line of credit? Obviously, like I said, you got to talk to the town attorney, make sure we have straight whether we need to go to a public meeting or not. That changes everything. So
Right.
let's get that answer and then we can revisit.
Right. So the other thing that, and you had a letter in the packet from Cheryl, that was a pass-through letter to me that I put in the packet that discussed that. The second thing that Cheryl was asking essentially was for permission to set up 2 credit cards with M&T Bank. So in the initial setting up seems to be, I think, a Board of Finance decision. And then the second thing would be to open a money market account at Webster. Webster's currently offering 5% in interest on the money market account. And the second thing is she made a recommendation on closing some of the M&T checking accounts and transferring that money in with other money into the money market account. And the specific ones were the non-recurring reserve fund, which has been on the books now since I became a town administrator. And I'm actually not really sure any of us understand what that is, or why we have it. We've certainly never spent anything from it. The fire engine reserve fund, which is just the money that was originally put in the fire engine bank account, which is not the total amount in the fire engine, fund. The total fund has around $400,000 in it. Of that $400,000, 54,000 is sitting in a distinct bank account. So the idea would be to close that bank account, use pooled cash, put that money in the money market account so at least it's earning reasonable interest. Do the same thing with the Department of Public Works Equipment Reserve Fund, the Revaluation Reserve Fund, and that little $8,700 AES capital fund. Because as you remember, of that $212 or $212,000 that's in the AES capital fund, $8,700 is still sitting in the old bank account. The rest is in pooled cash. So that's kind of her recommendation. That way, as we start transitioning accounts, we're knocking down the total number of accounts we have. And then whereas we have multiple, for instance, special revenue funds, what Cheryl would like to do is have a single special revenue fund and then just sub-allocate within that fund for all the existing funds.
So Eric, I think I'm getting a little confused between the word funds and the word accounts.
Correct. When I say account, I mean a physical, one of our 26 M&T bank accounts.
Right.
And when I say
like
fund,
her memo says, I think closing the following accounts and setting up the money market account makes sense. But then,
correct.
then she refers to them as funds. So will the funds remain intact as a virtual fund?
So as far as I know, the funds should remain intact as a virtual fund.
Okay.
We could shift, we have talked about whether it's smarter to shift all the money that's currently in pooled cash in the STIF account and dump it into the money market, since it's basically the same interest. And that way it would already be in that bank account and you wouldn't have to debit one and credit the other when you made a purchase. That's really for her to decide what the simplest way to do that is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I have no problem closing the accounts, and she's already referring to something we talked about earlier, which is to allocate any interest to the various funds based on the relative value. It makes sense. There's no sense keeping things any more complicated than they need to be. Louise?
Yeah, Eric, why are you looking to open up credit in M&T?
That's what I was going to ask. Thank you, Louise. That was my question.
We're not opening up credit in M&T.
The credit card.
Credit card, you said.
Credit cards.
Oh, if I did, that was a mistake. Our
okay.
intention is to close the M&T cards and swap them over to 2 Webster cards so we can actually monitor them.
Okay, you said open 2 M&T, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that was my error.
Cat, I didn't. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kim, is that your hand up or are you just adjusting the screen?
adjusting the screen, thank you.
All right.
That stuff all makes sense to me as long as we are tracking things properly. We should. I'm fully on board with this idea of consolidating our accounts down and getting as
Absolutely.
much of our money as humanly possible into accounts that are earning interest. So works for me.
Absolutely.
Anybody want to make a motion to,
I have another question.
yeah, go ahead,
The
Louise.
stiff account versus the money market account. Money markets can change at any time. What
Look
kind,
in the stiff account. The stiff
Oh, it-
account interest changes daily.
it's the same thing?
Okay.
Yep.
They're
Okay,
basically are they just keying off the same rate?
Probably the prime
Essentially?
rate.
Probably,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, probably going off the Fed prime rate.
yep.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, I'm good with that. So sorry, what would the motion be? Apologies.
Well, I think the
I'm good.
motion would be, just for reference in your packet on page 27 is the recommendation from Cheryl to Eric. So it's got a
That's right.
fairly good detail there, and I think it could be as simple as, motion to recommend that, Cheryl take the action to consolidate the accounts as recommended in her memo.
Memo of Wednesday, November 13th.
Yeah.
To move 5 different funds into Webster Bank. I'll make that motion. I'll go ahead and I'll move that we go ahead and approve Cheryl's plan to move those 5 fund amounts into a new Webster Bank account to see how that goes.
And does that include the credit card? Does that have to be part of the motion?
No, they're not really part of that.
Okay, that's fine.
Just
I
talking
would second that motion as well.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, then do you have our approval to move forward on that, Eric? When such time allows, and we move to Webster.
And obviously keep us updated on how that goes customer service wise.
Yeah.
And that was 6I, which is the recommendations for account
Speaking as a guy who has an M&T account.
I have a Webster account. I like them.
Yeah, I know. I've had so much frustration. I just hate moving. Anyway.
I think this, I think this takes us to 6J, which is the status of the town audits. Joanne had asked about these earlier, and we did have some input from the treasurer. I'm not sure she copied everything. Joanne, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
In my basis was, I know that last November we had an audit it was on our agenda. And I don't think she did copy everyone. I just wanted to see where we were in the cycle of audits, because last November we did one. And then I thought I had gone through all the agendas. I had posed this question to Eric, and Cheryl nicely answered it today. I feel like we're one audit behind. And I didn't want to, because I just got the email today, Mark, I didn't have time to look again.
Yeah, really go back through it and figure it
Yeah,
out.
because I know that Cheryl came on board and then she got everything in line, and it took a while for us to have that meeting in person with the auditor. And I thought that was the one. I found my packet in one of my folders, and I thought it said the year of 21-22, which would be fiscal year 22, correct? And so then Cheryl went on board and told me where she was in this year. Our fiscal year ends June 30th. They then will keep paying bills through August. I think she said a couple months. Then by the end of October of 24, she had just turned over. She takes a couple months to then write financial reports, statements, reports about the findings. And then they turn it over to the auditor. So that only happened October of 24, which was last month. October 30th of 24, she makes sure she gets that. So I was trying to get a timeline in my head, so every year I could know, okay, it gets in the auditor's hands. When do we get the audit back? Is that in January? Is it February, March? I just was trying to get a process so that we could get on a timeline of meeting.
So
Again, I know that we were behind. Cheryl was hired to get things done and put together a binder of what she does every year, what she puts into a binder to give to the auditor. And so I was just trying to get a basis of where we were. And then Cheryl did get back to me stating that we had discussed the year ending 2023, which would have been fiscal year 23 of last year, which starts July 1st of 22, ends June 30th of 23. But given the timeline that she gave me today, if she followed that process, she would have got things into everything done, wrapped up, and into the auditor by October 30th of 2023, which means we would have reviewed that particular audit. I don't know, would we have done it in March or April? I've gone to every single Board of Finance meeting. I don't remember that meeting happening yet. So I feel like there's one lost audit that we haven't reviewed. Am I wrong, Eric? Did we review it at a meeting, or was there just a footnote saying it's been put in? Right.
No, I think you have missed that. So
See, I knew there was one missing.
yeah,
And I
so
just didn't want to put that out to Cheryl until I was absolutely sure.
right, no, we put the audit for that year to bed last year around April.
Thank you. This is what
So
I'm trying to get up here. Like,
yeah,
this,
so
this, and that.
So basically what happens is, as of last year, we were basically caught up. And by basically caught up, I mean, we have the town books ready to go for the auditor as soon as they can schedule us. Now, one of the problems we have is there is a statewide shortage of firms doing
Right.
audits, and there's a statewide shortage of CPAs. Mahoney Sable's understaffed, frankly. The earliest they can get to us generally is around January 1st. And technically, they're supposed to have finished, in an ideal world, they're supposed to have finished the audit by December 31st, but they don't even start looking at it until then. So at this point, we have turned the audit books over to the auditor. So they have a copy of our books. Kind of the last thing we need to do is our capital appreciation schedule. Cheryl and I were working on that today, but there's never a rush for that because that is the last thing the auditor processes anyway. So even once the auditor starts auditing, it's probably 5 weeks before they need that. So we're still, 2 months plus ahead of when the auditor needs that information. So we have finally, the last 2 cycles have done our part. So I think the auditor should be able to start in on our audit somewhere around January 1. And the major work will be done it usually takes them around 6 weeks before they get things back to us.
And Eric, that is exactly what I just kind of wanted to know, the cycle, because I knew we were getting on the corrected cycle, like you said. So this is all the information that I was seeking. I knew from our prior meeting that, we're kind of one of the smaller towns, and I remember their shortages of the auditors, and I knew it wasn't right on time. They could get to us when they could. So
Right.
yeah, thank you. This is the exact feedback I wanted. But I know that we did miss last year's. I don't think it was ever reviewed with us. The one that ended 2023.
Pretty sure it was,
It's
but I could be wrong.
It's set, well, then maybe I have the wrong audit in the wrong book, because I was trying to make sense of the minutes, the agendas, and my backup from the meeting. And my backup from the meeting was 2021, 2023 with the whole big binder. So I'll listen. I know it's been a long meeting. Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to interject. So it's usually, finish fiscal year ends June 30th. Obviously, we have a couple months of finishing all the bills. Then we have the payments and outstanding. Then she takes a couple months to prepare by October 30th, the financial statements and everything to give to the auditor, minus what you just talked about, the depreciation schedule. And
Correct.
then come in a normal, by state law, it's supposed to be done by December 31st. Or whatever you said, the rules, but we kind of go past that.
Right, so let's put it in perspective. 75% of the towns in the state of Connecticut do not make the December 31st deadline. So even though that is a state guideline, most towns don't move. In the last 3 or 4 years, 25% of the towns have not made the drop dead date, which is July 1 after, so 6 months after they recommend.
Okay.
And if you remember right, 2 years ago, we missed that by a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
We were pretty close, but there was one thing that was still under, of concern to the auditor that was eventually identified. So we missed that because we got our books to them late. The good news is, our books are together way before the auditor can get to them. So as far as I'm concerned, the town's done their part in the process. I don't know what the status of the school's documentation is. I don't have that information. And I don't know what the school surplus is likely to be. I can tell you on the town side, we collected considerably more revenue than we anticipated, because in last year's budget fiscal year, we were not anticipating the movement to the STIF account. And that was basically 127,000 more dollars in income than we anticipated from that. So all total revenue wise, we came in around 146,000 over our initial estimate. So we made more money than we anticipated. And we spent about the equivalent. We underspent our budget as best we can tell by about $165,000. So the net is about $300,000 that appears will flow back into the unexpended fund balance from that year. So that's, that's awesome, actually. So I guess what I'm saying is financially, we're sound right now. And we've been pretty consistent with that total. So
Yeah, because I'd like to, I'm gonna backtrack and see what it was for the fiscal year that you said the audit's already in, and the 2023. So I'll have to backtrack and compare that. So if going on what you said and sticking to just this final timeline thing, so if he starts in January, you would think we might have had it back by April-ish, or you were thinking 6 weeks, 8. So I'm gonna look forward and see when that would have been presented to us. And I just don't recall it at all. But I mean, I don't know.
Is it available somewhere where we could still review it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
You
that's
could go
what
in
these
the
questions
treasurer.
were leading up to, Liz. That's what I was like, we have to do
Yeah.
this. I don't remember, because it helps
Sure.
us moving forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you say it's supposed to be under the treasurer's?
You all want a hard copy, or not a hard copy, because I don't think we had that many printed this year. Do you want a PDF of the whole audit file? Because
I
I'm
would
pretty
like
sure
that.
I've given it to the board before, but I'm happy to give it to you again.
Now, I
Well,
just
I'm new,
remember
so-
meeting about it and, oh, go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I'm new, so I would like it.
Yeah, I
Sure.
definitely want it. I've been asking these audit questions for like the last couple weeks, so just trying to get wrap my brain around the system and feeling like we missed a review. So,
Yeah.
Does anybody else feel like we've missed a review? I mean, I remember going through those reviews, but I don't know specifically for that year, Joanne.
We had one with
Anybody
Mike
else?
Van Deventer last year. Do you remember? Because he had to miss a couple meetings because his son had gotten injured that one time.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember the timing for all that. So
and truth, it
that's
was last November, believe it or not, and when I brought out, and that's all, I'm just trying to get the years, to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and based on what he's saying with the timeline, it probably would have been in our May, June, July, we're only at November. So if the audit for the year I'm talking about, fiscal that ended 2023, and then you wouldn't have seen it and been completed till April of 2024-ish, it would have been in the last couple of months, and I just don't recall it at all. So I'm just gonna backtrack. I'm glad we're getting the timeline, and if we haven't reviewed it, we can basically maybe I'll look at it, have a few
Yeah,
questions.
take a look
That's
at
all.
it. Yeah.
It just helps in the budget process, so thank you for letting me add it to the agenda and trying to kind of understand it, the timeline.
Can I ask another question before we move on? And I swear it's the
go
last one. Are we privy to the school's audit results?
They're
Uh,
combined.
So it's a combined audit. So when I send you the audit report, it will include, it includes both entities.
Thank you.
Yep. Because frankly, because they don't. Ordinarily, what's statutorily supposed to happen is they're supposed to give the treasurer, town treasurer, who's also technically the school board treasurer, the information to prepare the financial statements, which are then audited by Mahoney Sable. We don't ever get enough information to actually do that. They provide that information directly to the auditor. So the auditor then has to prepare the combined financial statements, and then back charges the school for the cost of doing that. So that's basically what's happening now.
Okay.
Any other?
How many
questions?
years of the audit do you want? I got it on my desktop going back to the 1920 budget year. I'd be happy to send them all to you if you want them all, or I can just give you all the latest one. Tell me what you want.
I'd go back to
definitely-
20.
Okay. No
I'd go back
problem.
to 20.
Yeah, I
Sure.
want the one that I was talking about, please, the 22, 23, the one that we would have met on this year sometime in 2024, because I have the other.
Okay. Yeah, I've never seen them before, so
No,
Yeah,
it's good
sure.
to compare year to year too.
Yeah.
They make for thrilling reading.
I bet. And should they be posted somewhere on the website or no? Is that not?
You could, I'm not sure those people would be interested in it, but they could always call and ask.
Okay. Because
Yeah, I don't know.
I didn't see them. I've been trying to do some homework and
Yeah,
didn't see anything like that.
Oh, sure. Yep. Yep. So the three things that are basically is there's a single audit report, a financial statement report, and then we anytime an audit has, if there's any findings of any sort, a town is required to submit a corrective action plan, which is basically you saying, okay, the auditors identified these things, here is how we will address them. So I can send you those also.
the findings are really the kind of the most important part of that. What's the finding, and what have we agreed to do to do better, basically.
Yep.
Okay.
The rest of it's a lot of dry legalese and some financial review.
Right.
I may read it. I may read it once and say, "Oh yeah, I never need to read this again."
Well, I think the findings are interesting. I mean, if you went back 4 or 5 years, you'd see that the findings there have been findings every year. Some of them major, some of them minor. And a few years ago, I think we've definitely gotten our house much more in order than it used to be.
Absolutely.
This
With
what I
Cheryl
had
as
found- oh,
treasurer,
sorry.
especially.
This was the one that I found that we had that in-person meeting. So the date was November 29th, 2023,
Yep.
fiscal year 2022. So, if it was November of last year, but it was the year before's audit, because I think that's when we were getting our house in order, Eric.
Yes, correct.
So, I mean, you've already agreed that so that's, this is making sense to me with having this last year, but it was the year before. There's no way that we, like at this particular time, we could have one for the current year. So yeah. again, I've said enough, but it's this big presentation thing and it does help a lot. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the audit process? Okay, I guess we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is board open discussion. Does anybody have anything else to bring before the board? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to correspondence. I don't think we've had any formal correspondence. Joanna already talked about the correspondence with the board about the tri-board meeting, and there were some questions about some of the stuff accounts. That was really more to the treasurer, I guess. Anybody have anything else? Okay, public speak. I don't see anybody in the public speak arena. This is just board members plus the community voice channel and Eric as the town of Andover. So if nobody has any objections, I think we should move for adjournment. Would anybody like to so move?
I will so
I'll
move.
make a motion to,
I saw Bill's hand up.
yeah.
Okay. Bill moves to adjourn. Who seconds? Joanne, you want to second
I'll
that?
second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll all vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Anybody opposed? Going once, going twice? No? Any abstentions? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. A lot to